In the northwest corner of the Pacific Ocean, hugging close to the eastern coast of Asia, lies a long crescent-shaped group of 4 large islands that form the nucleus of the Japanese Empire. These 4 islands, Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu, are commonly called Japan proper, and combined they cover an area of 147,000 square miles. This group of islands was the Japan of the Meiji Restoration era, and could possibly be the Japan of the post-war world. From these 4 islands, she emerged in 1875 to begin 50 years of aggression, seizing adjacent islands and securing footholds on the continent, preliminary to the more ambitious moves of recent years. The first expansion after many dormant years was in the Sino-Japanese War in 1894. During this war, she advanced so quickly that China sued for an early peace, and with the peace, Japan wrung from China the island of Formosa and chain. And took over the Tsar's lease in the Kwantung Peninsula. Also, as a result of this war, she secured the southern half of the island of Sakhalin, called by the Japanese Karafuto, located north of Hokkaido and off the eastern coast of Siberia. This was the Imperial Empire up until 1910. At that time, independent Korea, which was a prey to internal strife and a weak central government, was the logical point for expansion and offered an avenue of approach to China and Manchuria. The patient Japanese very strategically waited a few years after the Russo-Japanese War before they annexed Korea formally. Later, she saw an opportunity in World War I for further expansion and cashed in on her careful participation as an ally by taking over the German island possessions north of the equator, the Marianas, Caroline, and Marshall Islands. Just as she had planned, these islands were mandated to her at the conclusion of the First World War. So by 1920, Japan proper was protected by strategic islands immediately to the south and by a complex Pacific chain. At the same time, she had feelers extending into continental Asia by way of Korea and Guangdong. Just as Germany tried to dominate the heartland, so Japan felt drawn to China, and particularly to Manchuria, which possessed metals that Japan lacked. In 1931, the Japanese army took over Manchuria and turned it into a center of heavy industry and a laboratory for totalitarian experiments. Then, with this North China province as a base, the Japanese in 1937 began their war against China proper. After many gains in China, the climax of Japanese territorial ambition culminated in the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Atlantic seaboard of the United States lies in a position similar to the 4 main islands of Japan. From Portland, Maine to Savannah, Georgia, the range of latitude is almost identical to that of Japan proper, extending from the northern tip of Hokkaido to the southern end of Kyushu. Sapporo, the capital of Hokkaido, and Boston are at the same latitude. Likewise, Tokyo, Japan's capital, lies in a position comparable to Richmond, Virginia, and Nagasaki is at the same latitude as Atlanta, Georgia. In general, it may be said that the winters in Japan are slightly colder than in the corresponding latitudes of the United States. This is particularly true of the western side of Honshu, bordering on the Japan Sea. Summers in Japan are more nearly similar to the summers found in corresponding latitudes of America. It is, however, relatively more humid in central and southern Honshu and Kyushu. Using the state of Montana as a standard of comparison demonstrates the relative size of Japan proper. Montana contains an area of 147,138 square miles. The total combined land of the 4 main islands covers an area almost identical to that of the western state. It is also interesting to compare the populations of the two. This island empire contains some 75 million people, while Montana holds less than 600,000. The density of populations in Japan has doubled since 1880, so that today it has approximately 500 inhabitants per square mile. In Formosa, the density is about 400 people per square mile, and in Korea, slightly less, with about 300 per square mile. These figures, of course, do not give a true indication of the concentration of people in the inhabited areas. It must be remembered that only 20% of the land can be used to support human life. The physiography of Japan presents a striking combination of mountains and seas. Here we see the famous Nikko Falls. This is one of the largest in Japan with a height of 550 feet. At no point is there land more than 90 miles from the open sea, and the few plains are all relatively small. Japan may be described as a country that is a combination of hilly and mountainous terrain, of rugged coastline, and of rich, varicolored vegetation that altogether combine to present a picture of scenic beauty for which she is justly famous. Structurally, these islands are composed of a thick core of hills and mountains. About 75% of the land is of this type, with slopes too sharp and soil too thin for cultivation. Since Japan's mountains are relatively young, streams have cut sharp canyons, but not broad valleys. The mountain streams are short, swift, and shallow, with limited drainage basins. Although they have no navigation value, they are important sources of hydroelectric power and irrigation for the thickly populated plains. Streams and rivers in the lowlands may be described in two words: shallow and stony. They flow in wide, divided channels, boulder-strewn and gravel-filled, and often flanked by natural or artificial levees. These levees are necessary not only because seasonally the rivers flood violently and suddenly, but also because diluvial deposits have raised the riverbed above the surrounding territory. These characteristics make the streams of little use for anything but fishing, and of course simplify the problem of gravity irrigation. The lakes of Japan are noted for their scenic beauty. In origin, there are two types: those lakes which were formed in the craters of extinct volcanoes or by volcanic eruptions, and lagoons formed in alluvial depressions in river valleys along the seashore. The largest lake is Biwa, situated near Kyoto. It lies over 250 feet above sea level within a rim of mountains and covers an area of 718 square kilometers. Japan is a land of many volcanoes. In all, she has over 500 craters, of which some 60 have been active in historic times. These volcanoes have contributed somewhat to her resources in the formation of deposits of sulfur and abrasives. Recently active eruptions, together with frequent and often destructive earthquakes, have caused considerable loss of life and property for the Japanese. The many cones provide some of the highest elevations of the islands, and lava plateaus associated with volcanoes are a widespread and prominent feature of the topography. Japan's plains are few, and those which she has are isolated patches of sediment in coastal indentations or mountain basins. Lowlands are seldom continuous for any distance, but are interrupted where mountains come down to the very margin of the ocean. Japan's greatest centers of population are found on the plains at the heads of the great bays on the Pacific side of central and southern Japan. Here there are arable lands for intensive agricultural development, tidewater transportation for industry, and adequate space for urban expansion. Within Japan proper, there are four major areas of population concentration. There is the Tokyo-Yokohama metropolitan section, the Nagoya district, the Osaka-Kobe-Kyoto Industrial and Urban Center, and the mining and industrial area of northern Kyushu and the southwestern tip of Honshu. In general, the southern slopes of the islands are more thickly settled than those of the north and west, and the population gradually decreases toward the northerly prefectures of Honshu. Although she is still primarily an agrarian country, in recent decades the larger cities have grown at phenomenal rates. The farmer, however, will probably always be the dominant citizen of Japan. Although only 1 acre out of 5 in this country of up-edged mountains will grow food, the farmer makes the most of the land he has with the aid of a good climate, hard work, and plenty of fertilizer. The picture of metropolitan Japan today greatly differs from the scenes shown here. Cities that once charmed tourists with their colorful, gay shops and bright clothes are now very drab indeed. the perpetual pounding by American B-29s has had a paralyzing effect on Japanese metropolitan life, and the once beautiful parks and streets are today lined with shallow trenches dug in the hope that they will provide protection from enemy bombing. Street lights are constantly dimmed, and there are no neon signs or bright banners. War has changed the tempo. Life is grim. Perhaps the most unique characteristic of Japanese cities is the dual personality that is brought about by the conflict between Western and Eastern cultures. The business district of a Japanese metropolis such as Tokyo or Osaka reflects a cross-section of modern Japan with new modern office structures copied from those of the Western world. Many of these new buildings of the business district were built after the great earthquake of 1923 that demolished much of Tokyo and Yokohama. Probably Japan's greatest single natural resource is the position of the islands in relation to the Asiatic mainland. This island empire conveniently lies in the great circle routes between the principal Asiatic ports and those of North America. Another convenient geographical peculiarity is the conformation of these islands that places the best harbors on the Pacific coast and gives that coast the most favorable soil and climate. This area had a great concentration of population and a considerable development of both commerce and industry long before the opening of the North Pacific trade route that brought the world's ships just offshore. The many large coastal indentations, such as the bays of Tokyo, Suruga, Ise, and Osaka, were natural harbors for Japan to carry on foreign trade. Her greatest market lies in Eastern and Southern Asia, and there too may be found many of her basic needs. All of the larger Japanese cities are actually collections of towns that have been overwhelmed and absorbed into the metropolitan centers. These former towns retain their identity as districts within the city by means of the common suffix machi attached to their names. Here are a few scenes of Tokyo's business district. This is the focus of the country, with 5 big national roads running into this famous capital. Tokyo might well be called the New York of Japan, as far as sightseeing is concerned. Here we see a native playhouse. Probably one of the most interesting structures in Tokyo is the superb and widely known Imperial Hotel. This hotel was built in 1922 by native artisans acting under the supervision of the American architect Frank Lloyd Wright. This structure, the ultimate in Japanese elegance, is an example of the new Japan and presents a striking contrast to Nagoya Castle, which is typical of older feudal days. The castle is about 400 years old and was built by Kato Kiyomasa. A picturesque moat dotted with watchtowers completely surrounds the castle to defend the enclosed grounds from enemy attack. This famous old structure, with its lofty spires that reach up into the clouds, has never suffered in a war and has today been converted into a military depot. Another of the famous sights of Tokyo is Ueno Park that lies at the north edge of the capital. There are many memorial arches throughout the park, one of which is the Saigo statue that stands overlooking the vast city. Another famous landmark of the country is Nara Park, noted for the many live deer that roam the grounds. In season, the beaches of the Kurales and Karafuto are alive with thousands of seals. These commercially valuable animals that roam the northern Pacific Ocean were for many years the cause of strained relations between the United States, Japan, and Russia. They roamed the high seas widely, but they would always return for breeding purposes to certain definite bits of land. And it was this instinct that gave particular nations property rights in them and created several international complications. In 1911, there was a noticeable diminishing of the seal herds, and in that same year, Japan and Russia signed a treaty with the United States which forbade pelagic sealing or the killing of fur seals while in the water. By the same treaty, the legitimate killing of surplus male seals on land was placed under the direct control of the government interested. Just prior to the Pearl Harbor attack, the Japanese broke the treaty with the excuse that the seals were eating squid and devilfish that are sought by Japan's fishing fleet. Probably there is little hope of again saving the seals that roam the Pacific until Japan is defeated and has been taught to live in a world that respects treaties designed to save the lives of both men and animals. There is no doubt of the great importance of the expansive waters that surround the empire. A large percentage of Japan's fishing activities, however, were carried on in foreign waters prior to the war, but it is doubtful if she will ever again be allowed to operate in waters in the vicinity of other shores, where her fishermen can be used as spies and provocateurs. The many Japanese fishing boats that once operated in the Pacific waters from Mexico to Alaska and were known to have carried stores of dynamite and guns will no doubt be restricted in the future. Likewise, rigid laws will undoubtedly be enforced that will protect the mother seals, known as cows, and their young pups. These fur seal pups, from their birth until they leave the islands in winter, are nourished exclusively on milk. The killing of the mother seals while at sea, where they are obliged to go for food, therefore results in the death of their pups by slow starvation, and is of course serious injury to the herd from the loss of the potential productivity of the cows in subsequent years. The land of Japan offers a sparse supply of mineral wealth. Only coal, copper, gold, silver, and sulfur are present in sizable quantities. The islands are so located geographically that until recently, important minerals could easily be shipped to her from her southern colonies. But Japan's greatest wealth is her 17,000 miles of coastline surrounded by the friendly sea. Although typhoons occasionally devastate the shores, there are innumerable good harbors along the coastline. Sheltered waters such as the inland sea invite the angler and the trader, and the waters around Japan comprise the greatest fishing grounds in the world. The limited supplies of food on the land, the coastal character of the population, and the highly indented shoreline all tend to continually push the people to the sea. The Japanese beach is strewn with boats, nets, and drying fish. Generally, the villages along the shore reflect the poverty of those who engage in the industry, for the more important fishing activities are in the hands of large corporations. Whatever Japan's losses are in this war, she will always maintain her commanding geographic position among the empires of the world. Through all of her recent history, she has followed geographic opportunity to her greatest advantage. Had she studied her geography lesson better and not felt her position so secure, she might never have made the basic error of military history, the error of inviting disaster by attempting aggression in many directions.